Welcome to Confessions of a CEO, powered by RG. My name is Carl Swansbury and I'm delighted today to be spending some time in the company of Gary Lumby. Many of you will know Gary, but for those who don't, Gary is a very successful entrepreneur, advisor, investor, and now non-executive director. Gary spent the early part of his career both with Barclays Bank and Yorkshire Clydesdale Bank here in the Northeast before setting up his own management consultancy focused entirely on helping owners of privately owned businesses scale, develop, and fundamentally create value. Today, I'm looking forward to getting to know Gary on a more personal note and actually trying to understand a little bit more about Gary's why and what has driven him to achieve the success he has in his career whilst focusing on helping other people create success within their respective businesses. For sure, I think we're all in for a treat. Gary, genuinely, I'm absolutely delighted to have you on my podcast today because whilst we spend stacks of time together socially as friends and whilst we have lots of mutual clients, it's very rare we get a chance to just catch up, you and I. So massive thanks.
We're usually too busy enjoying ourselves, Carl, to sit down and talk seriously about business. So this would be a nice change.
Correct. No, well, massive thanks, Gary. Really appreciate you putting aside some time. So I think I'd love to just maybe start right back at the beginning. Obviously, straight out of college, post your A-levels, you decided to go into banking. Why banking, Gary?
A very good question. I've often asked myself that. When 37 years passed and I was still in banking, it got slightly worrying actually. But anyway, I decided to go into Barclays actually, at the management development program there, rather than go to university, because I did miraculously get 3 A-levels and I was going to Lancaster University to do accountancy actually. Funny enough. You're probably thinking it's a good job I didn't go there.
No comment.
Being an accountant yourself. But I decided to go into Barclays. I simply wanted to get into work really, and I think Barclays offered me a good opportunity. I could see obviously it was an enormous global organisation. I had career ambitions. Started off in the Northeast, didn't want to particularly stay there, although I had strong family ties and friends there. I had ambitions to move across the UK and even potentially move abroad. So I think the opportunities that role and that programme sort of offered me, I think just swayed me, because in those days, and we are going back quite a long way unfortunately, it wasn't as common to go to university. Not everybody went to university.
Sure.
A lot of people went into vocational work or whatever, vocational training or straight into apprenticeships. And therefore, my decision not to go to university, whilst it irked probably the school, the grammar school I went to, and probably my parents to a certain extent, I think it wasn't that uncommon.
So Gary, obviously, as you say, you had your place lined up at university. That was the intention. Mm-hmm. What derailed that?
I did not fancy going to Lancaster. I had Lancaster and Salford often be places, but ultimately, having seen the campus, having seen university, I just didn't feel it was the right place for me to go. It wasn't that I was a home bird or anything like that. It wasn't that I was afraid for leaving home. So it was just the case that I didn't really feel an affiliation with the place, and ultimately the pull of the Barclays offer and the fact that it was their fast track management development program excited me more.
And do you think the lack of attraction to university was more about not wanting to be stuck in a lecture theatre and you wanted to get at the core face of business? Was that part of it? Not
as much, Carl. At the end of the day, I went into banking and then straight into further education because I had to do my chartered banking examinations, over a few years. So it wasn't as though I was getting away from being educated or having to do exams. It was more about the passion and the curiosity about wanting to get into business at some level.
And of course, I've heard once or twice you refer there, Gary, to wanting to get into business. And of course, you were thinking about doing a degree in accountancy, which would have been an obvious introduction to business. So how and why did you decide banking was the right road into business versus just going straight into business?
Well, and there was no history in my family of entrepreneurship.
Right, okay.
So I didn't have a role model in that respect to follow. I'd taken economics at A level and passed that, and that's why I was going into. When I said accountancy, it was accountancy, but it was paired with economics. So it was accountancy and economics, right. And it was a dual honours degree. And ultimately, I always had an interest in the economy and the world economy, macroeconomics, microeconomics. So therefore, banking is such an integral part of all that. The financial system, business wouldn't operate without it. So ultimately, banking, whilst maybe not everybody's cup of tea, certainly sort of caught my interest.
Understand. And of course, as you say, you spent many successful years at Barclays. Just talk me through, at what point did you feel you had got from Barclays what you wanted from Barclays, career-wise?
22 years. Back in 1999, I left Barclays. I was recruited, headhunted really, into Clydesdale and Yorkshire Bank, where I spent 15 years. And ultimately, the reason I left Barclays after 22 years, so obviously it was a big decision for me to take,
huge.
Of which, the directors tried to talk me out of it. But ultimately, I felt my only future really of career progression in Barclays was to go to London. And that was what they wanted me to do. At that time, I didn't really want to go to London. I'd built a family and a life for me in the Northeast. Where I remain today, as you know. And so consequently, against that backdrop, Clydesdale and Yorkshire offered me a role in Leeds, in head office in Leeds, although I did spend the first sort of year looking after the region for them in terms of getting to know their systems, their people, their structure on the business banking side. And so I ran the Northeast region for them for a year, but it was always the intention to transition into the role of head of business banking based in Leeds, which I was happy to do because I could commute.
Yes.
And I spent many years commuting to Leeds and also the rest of the country, working for them. And I think that was a difficult decision to make. I was sad to leave Barclays. They hadn't done anything wrong. They'd promoted me through to, the highest level I could get to before a directorship. And then ultimately, that was presumably on the cards if I'd moved down to London. But it was just, I didn't want to do that at that moment in my time. So I made the leap. It was a bit of a leap of faith, not knowing that much about Clydesdale and Yorkshire, who were then owned by National Australia Bank. One of the attractions was that might mean a little bit of travelling to Australia.
And has it done?
And it did actually, yes. It transpired because they were owned by National Australia Bank. They also had Bank of New Zealand. They also had a bank in America, Great Western. And so it was great that I was able to travel to Australia to meet my colleagues over there, share best practices, have workshops with them, and the same in New Zealand and the same in America. So I don't think I might have got that with Barclays, who knows, but I think it was because it was a much smaller bank. There was sort of, and I came in at a more senior level. I think it was an opportunity that I perhaps wouldn't have got with Barclays, but certainly no regrets. And it was 15 years with Clydesdale and Yorkshire, and of which I think, as you may know, of the first 6 years I ran the business bank, and then the last 7 or 8 years I ran the retail bank. And that was an interesting time to be in banking through the global financial crisis. I had 3,500 people working for me, 372 branches, and a small business as well, which was again part of my role in Barclays. It's always been a passion of mine, and ultimately that taught me a lot. So no regrets.
Obviously, you talked a little bit about your great memories of Barclays, and the fact that your move felt a little forced, i.e., you didn't leave Barclays because you wanted to leave Barclays. You left for a regional opportunity. What was it that fundamentally held you back from wanting to geographically move to London? Which, of course, is definitely a city that people thoroughly enjoy living in and working in. So what was the reason for not wanting to be in the capital, Gary?
Yeah. Nothing to do with London, which is a great city, and I visit it quite often. I've got many clients in London, as you know now. And ultimately, I think it was me. It was about, I think I am naturally risk averse, which is slightly bizarre, bearing in mind I've done some fairly risky things in my life. We won't go into all of those. But I am sort of cautiously risky. So I think moving again, and it was, somebody to go to university or go to London, that trait's there still.
Yes.
You know, at the end of the day, you know my wife, and I would say my wife is far more entrepreneurial than I am. And that's the reason why we are in the position we are today in terms of financially and security-wise. It's as much to do with her as opposed to me, because she's the one who's been taking more risks than I have. And I think that's just been my nature.
Yes, understand. And of course, you've mentioned your wife Hayley, who is a very good friend and someone I absolutely adore dearly. You met, of course, Hayley, through banking, didn't you?
Through Barclays,
so
yeah.
lots to thank Barclays for,
Lots
Gary.
to thank Barclays for. And she reminded me the other day when she was on a Facebook group of Barclays, and the question was asked, how many people did get married to people they met in Barclays? And there was an awful lot of yeses, you know, there was an awful lot of people who did that, and another reason to be grateful for Barclays, of course. But yes, I met her in Barclays, and she encouraged me. She didn't hold me back from leaving. I think, as I say, I was probably more worried about it than she was, because she could see the upside far greater than that. And she has been responsible for making us, as I said, taking some of the riskier decisions about buying land, building properties, opening new businesses, buying businesses that we've done. And she's probably been the driver. To be fair, she's been the driver of that. But I've probably been the one who sort of, not held her back, certainly, because I certainly haven't, but sort of had a cautious voice in the background.
Yes, and as you say, you know, you were working within Yorkshire Bank, thoroughly enjoying the role that you had. Of course, you were then in a relationship with Hayley. At what point did you and Hayley start to think about, you know, your own business outside of employment, because you were both in banking and employed at that time?
Yeah, so I'd left Barclays and gone to Yorkshire and Clydesdale. As I say, I was running the retail bank. Ultimately, 15 years on, 22 years with Barclays, we bought our first business together, which we still have today, in 2008, 2009, at the end of the financial crisis. And she's still running that business today, which is a commercial patent and debt rating business. And I think that was the first time that either of us had thought about life outside of banking, because at that time Hayley was still working for Barclays. And she had she was a relationship director, so she had a senior role within corporate banking. And that was, with a commensurate salary and benefits. And that was a big decision for her to leave, but she was, again, saw this opportunity to buy this business, who we knew the previous owner, and she was the one who wanted to do it more than me in terms of obviously you're giving up that sort of role to buy an SME and with the hope of growing it. There's no guarantees, but she could see the potential. She could see the fact that she wanted to get into running her own business, and she was the first off the blocks. And that was in January 2000. Sorry, that was in October 2009. Then I decided to leave banking in 2012 on January the 1st, because that was another 15 years I'd done it. And frankly, when you're in a senior position in a global organisation, you do spend a lot of time away from home. And one of my faults is, I probably focused too much on work and put my all into it. And I think at one point when I was going to Australia, and I got there, and the World Cup was on, I remember it. And Hayley rang me, she said, you know what, you haven't told me where you're staying, which hotel you're staying at, you haven't told me how long you're going to be there. And all I was doing was just so focused on work that I'd probably forgotten my family a little bit. So I think that made me decide after 37 years in banking, it was probably time to spend more time with the family. So ultimately, that was why I left. I didn't fall out with Clydesdale or Yorkshire. They were very, very good to me, looked after me. In fact, they were my first client when I moved into open my management consultancy business. Wow, okay. They were my first client for 2 years. So that was part of my exit agreement. They felt that they wanted me to work with them for another, was 18 to 24 months that we retained a working relationship together.
Obviously, you've just mentioned, Gary, the fact that you're so committed to your career and you're so committed to everything you do in business. And what do you think was the reason at that particular time something clicked and you, for the first time, maybe acknowledged that you didn't have balance, or the balance that you were comfortable with?
Yeah, I mean, we all have to work hard. It's a given, isn't it? But ultimately, when your wife, who you love dearly, says to you, you know, I think it's enough, you've been away from home, the kids have suffered, I've suffered, you know, our personal life has suffered. I do not think it's about time to put us first rather than banking first. I think that was the catalyst, to tell the truth. I probably would have gone on and maybe not left had we not had that serious conversation. And it just made me think that, and I do think, I fell back into old habits. As you know, I know how hard you work, and we still work very, very hard. Never thought after 10 years leaving banking I'd still be working as hard as I am now. But what I would say is that, you know, an advice to anybody out there is, it's great, not that I didn't enjoy banking, but I enjoy working for myself better, because I think you put the hard effort in and you get the reward back, and it's far more flexible, you're in much more control, and nobody's nobody's telling you that you've got to do more hours, only your conscience. So ultimately, I think I would say to anybody out there who's thinking about going into business, it's a great thing to do, because not only do you're in charge of your own destiny, but you're also in charge of your own home life work balance, and I think that's a big plus. And if you can enjoy it, which clearly we do, I know you enjoy your corporate finance role immensely, and I enjoy my role as well. And I think if you can enjoy something that you do for a lot of time during every day, it makes it not seem like work, it makes it more seem like just part of life's enjoyment, life's fun.
That's right. I mean, if business is your greatest hobby,
Yeah.
then actually you never work a day in your life, right? Is the point you're making, and I totally agree.
I agree. I mean, the challenge then is, you know, when do you stop? How do you stop? Because retirement is looming for me at some point in time. But ultimately, you know, that will be a big part of my day taken away from me, and I'd have to fill it up. And I don't ever see me sort of winding completely down. It would be doing less than I do now at some point in time.
You mentioned that obviously you and your wife Hayley, Gary, bought a commercial painting and decorating business just at the end of the financial crisis, which of course we all remember commencing in March 2007. Why at that time would you have considered buying your own business, given you'd never ran a business before? I mean, where did that moment of genius come from?
Well, I wouldn't say it was genius, but also I think it was an opportunity. You know, we knew the previous owner, he was retiring. We knew the quality of his work. We'd actually used him in some of our houses. So ultimately, we had a conversation with him. I think we had some properties by then. We certainly built our own house by then, and ultimately, we knew the quality of the work. We knew that could be expanded upon, because he wasn't in it to build a business, he was in it for a lifestyle.
Right.
And ultimately, Hayley in particular, saw the potential of that business. We were just about to go into property development and property investment. So ultimately, it seemed quite a nice fit with that, because we could use our own men to do some of our own properties. And funny enough, and I always smile when I think of this, my father, who, I came from a very working class, poor background. My father was a painter and decorator.
Was he really?
Yeah, he never lived, unfortunately, to see the fact that he never lived long enough to see the fact that we bought a painter and decorating business, which would have made him smile, because he knew I had no interest and no ability in painting and decorating. But we ended on that. And to this day, Hayley runs that business. And whilst I try and give us some sound advice from time to time, and hopefully some introductions, it's all her work.
And of course, Hayley's background was corporate banking, like your own, and neither of you had ran a SME before.
No.
That learning curve must have been pretty steep for Hayley and you.
I think so, but banking obviously gives you really great foundations. You know, she ran corporate and prior to that, small business portfolios of businesses. I started, when I went into Barclays, I started, business manager. I went as a cashier actually, but progressed to business manager level, then went into corporate banking, became, the trouble with banking, the further move up the ladder, you're further away you're from the customer, and that's certainly the case. But ultimately, I went through the ranks, and I'd advised many small businesses, many businesses over the years about, not only their finances, but I was always interested in their whole business, because you can't just separate finance from all the other aspects of business. It's just one aspect of many, and so ultimately, throughout my banking career, and Hayley's as well, we learned a lot about businesses, what are good businesses, what are bad businesses, what are the mistakes we've learned from, and hopefully they've learned from. And we just decided to put that into practice, and I think it was a really, really good foundation for us to do that.
And was the knowledge you both had accumulated as advisors and bankers, not owners, was it actually very transferable?
Very, very transferable. And this is, and it's very transferable to any business. And this is what I say to my clients. As you know, I've got a fairly eclectic portfolio of many, many different businesses across different sectors. And people say to me, well, how can you advise a dom care business one minute, a recruitment business the next, a IT business the next, the marketing business the next, an accountancy business the next? And I say, because actually the principles of good business are transferable. You very rarely come across in business something which is not somebody's come across before, unless it's a new IT, evolution or a completely new, different way of doing things. But ultimately, the more you learn, the easier it becomes, because ultimately you can put those best practices into different businesses at different times when they're facing the challenges and opportunities that they will come across.
You mentioned that you decided on the 1st of January to hand in your cards at Yorkshire Clydesdale. That sounds like it was maybe an interesting New Year's resolution. I mean, just talk me through the thinking and how long it had taken to get to that point.
It'd probably be a 6 months negotiation with them, because you don't leave an executive role very easily. You've got to you've got to negotiate your exit, because you only get one chance to do that, and ultimately when you're out, you're out. And and I always say to people, no matter what role you're in, when you leave, you will be pretty quickly forgotten. The analogy is throwing a stone in a pond and there's loads of ripples, but very quickly those ripples disappear and it becomes flat again. And ultimately that's, so you can't then go back and renegotiate your leaving package, or, think that they're going to necessarily look after you. Although, to be fair, Yorkshire and Clydesdale did look after me in the fact that they gave me a good package, and also they employed me for 18 months to 2 years afterwards. So no regrets, and I want to thank them. But it took 6 months. So 1st of January, negotiations started in probably June time, and it was just that long it took, really. And it just seemed the right time to sort of, a new year, a new start. And I was very clear in my own mind, and fail to plan to fail. Ultimately, I had a plan that I wanted to set up my own management consultancy business targeting SMEs, because over the years in banking, I realised that it was the SMEs who weren't getting necessarily all the help that either was there already waiting for them, either through the likes of Business Link or the LEPs or wherever, well, the LEPs weren't in existence, but Business Link. Not necessarily were able to tap into that advice and support that perhaps the larger corporates and certainly the PLCs were used to getting from non-executive directors or consultants, whether it be Accenture or McKinsey's or ever. That was in the mind of SME owners, nor could they afford that sort of support anyway. So those who were switched on looked to things like Business Link, Growth Accelerator, what was available in the public sector, of which was of mixed quality, and therefore I thought there was a market opportunity. Produce something that people want to buy, not that you necessarily want to produce. If they both marry up, that's great, which they did. Thank God, in my role in my business. So I was confident that the experience I brought with me I would be able to give to the SME business owners who were going through opportunities and challenges in their business that potentially they weren't getting the right support and advice to cope with.
And obviously you'll have had a huge client base from your banking days, and lots of brilliant relationships that will have accumulated. But from day dot, how did you go about actually generating opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously a point facing every business. How do you grow your client base?
Zero, which must have been quite daunting, albeit exciting.
Yeah, but in any business, you are going. I always say to all my clients, look, you cannot stand still in terms of marketing and business development, because you will always lose clients, no matter how good you are. Clients, will leave you for whatever reason. They might go insolvent, they might sell, they might change suppliers. So you always have to develop new business opportunities, and not just relying on your existing clients. Although clearly low-hanging fruit would be cross-sell, upsell to existing clients first and foremost, before spending time looking for new clients, but you have to do both. And so therefore, whether you're starting from zero or whether you're starting from 100 clients, it doesn't matter. You continue to develop business. And funny enough, what you say about taking clients with me, I go to my previous point. I didn't really, because I'd been so far removed by then from the clients. You know, I was managing teams, not managing clients.
Yes.
I was managing strategy, not managing clients. So ultimately, I didn't have those relationships any longer. There's one or two who knew me, but it was more around businesses in the Northeast, where I'd always lived, despite working in Leeds and travelling around. I'd always lived in the Northeast. I'd been on the Business Link board in Sunderland. I'd been on the, as well as being on the, loads of boards in Yorkshire. I'd also done a bit in the Northeast, and I'd lived and I had a wide social and business network. And therefore, when I announced the fact that I was setting this company up and leaving the bank, my first two clients were actually people who I knew socially, who had businesses, but not through banking. And those two clients back in January 2012, one I've still got today, and one I lost last year in 2022 because they sold out to a PLC, which is a fantastic way to lose a business and is really good news for them.
Yeah, and of course it demonstrates that the advice that you gave them over the years has paid dividends, right? Because for some shareholders, that's the right conclusion to their ownership story.
Absolutely. With every client you talk about exit succession planning, because many of them don't even think about it, and particularly family-owned businesses, of course. But ultimately, that business that sold to a PLC was a fantastic business anyway. Hopefully, I just help them a little bit more and give them the right advice, and they got to where they needed to be, and that the people they employed are still there. They're just working for a PLC rather than a private company now, and hopefully that whole business will go on from strength to strength.
And obviously, as you say, Gary, you set a focus on success, which is your management consultancy business, and since then you've worked with hundreds of privately owned businesses across sector, across geography. And there'll have been a lot of things that you've learned and the boards that you've advised have benefited from. If there was one thing that you think most SMEs often have as a common failing, what would it be?
Well, basically, despite what I said about risk-taking, I would say not taking enough calculated risks, and actually being willing to invest in their businesses to facilitate growth. A lot of SME owners are very cautious, a bit like I was, but I've learned to be a little bit less cautious. And some of them will see opportunities, but let those opportunities go because they're too wary about putting their business at risk, or not sure about the opportunity to see what return on investment they could get. Had they got the right advice, had they looked into it in detail, and had they written a plan, I think, and had they understood that, the capital sitting in bank accounts generally does not give you a massive rate of return. And therefore, whilst everybody needs a element of, working capital, investment capital behind them, having lots of it and not using it for reinvestment purposes is probably not the best use of that money.
It's pretty inefficient, right?
It's pretty inefficient. Inflation, particularly in the current environment, is eating into the real value of those monies, even if you've maxed it out in fixed term bonds or whatever. So ultimately, reinvesting it back in your business to create opportunities, and even looking outside of your business at other, either acquiring or diverging from your core business into other areas is actually, yes, it doesn't come without risk, as you know, but it definitely should be on the radar. And many businesses haven't got it on the radar, or even if they do, are scared of taking that foot in the water and diversifying and making that investment because they're scared of losing their reserves, if you like, their hard-fought capital that they've earned over many years from their core business, because they don't want to take that risk. But they should. And that's what I see time and time again.
And as you said earlier, often in privately owned businesses, the owners don't have a network, they don't know how you can access a non-executive director because there's not like a yellow pages of non-exec directors. In how have you found business owners have gravitated toward you? You know, how can a business owner find themselves talking to a non-exec director?
I mean, if you, I class myself as a professional services firm just like you. If you ask, 100 professional services firms, where do they get their business from? The number one answer will always be referrals or word of mouth. But I always say, yes, that's super if you can get that, and I get quite a bit of my business from that as well. But ultimately, even in that, you need a process. You need a process in seeking referrals from your best clients. Yes, they might give you a referral, but ultimately, they're much more likely to give you a referral if you've got a process of asking them for one. So that it's just common sense, but so many businesses don't have that process in place and think, oh, I can't ask a client to refer me. Of course you can if that client's giving you fantastic feedback about your service and you've got a long relationship. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't they want to do that anyway? But I think that's only one small part of developing, obviously, business development, marketing, sales. People say sales and marketing, you should read marketing and sales because you've got to do marketing before the sales come. So ultimately, it's about making sure that you've got a marketing and sales plan to actually invest in that area of your business to attract, not only to retain your existing clients, of course, because marketing to your existing clients is equally as important, if not more important, than marketing to new clients. So you've got to have a plan which has got to be well resourced, both in people terms, but also in monetary terms. So many SMEs, and I'm sure you've seen this. When you ask around who's in charge of marketing, well, it's the MD, isn't it?
That's right.
Because they haven't taken it seriously enough, or they haven't wanted to invest in it. There's a cost. So they do it themselves and they don't do it great, and they maybe have a digital agency that they're working with, but they don't really have a relationship and they don't press for return on investment reports from them, and it goes on. But I think what I do is effectively, yes, I rely on word of mouth and referrals, but I do ask for referrals from my best clients if they are highly satisfied with what I'm giving. But I also put myself out, not necessarily online, but ultimately to a certain extent on social media, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, but ultimately, so I am active, particularly on LinkedIn, but I'm not active on my website. I think my website is more of somebody will go there just to make sure, that the word of mouth or the referral they've got, or the video they see me on LinkedIn, or whether they've seen me at an event, a networking event, or speaking at a conference, they'll go on my website and check me out and make sure that I'll look the part, and I make sure that does that. But I spend most of my time in terms of trying to gain new business from either networking at appropriate events. Obviously, we couldn't do that during COVID, but we all went online.
Indeed.
Certainly not as good as face-to-face, I never think, but still very important, very efficient. So networking, social media, speaking engagements, attending seminars, and I always say to people, look, you've got to be prepared to put yourself in uncomfortable positions if you want to grow yourself and grow your business. And yes, nobody particularly relishes the idea of going on stage and speaking to a bunch of people they don't know, or going to a networking event where you don't know anybody there, and you've got to introduce yourself and start the whole process. But you have to do it. And once you start it, it becomes easier. Yeah. And if all you're doing is talking about you and your business, or particularly if you're giving a seminar, if you're giving a speech on your business, a bit like this, it's the easiest thing in the world because you've lived through it. It's harder to speak as an expert on a subject, I always think, if you aren't doing it every single day. But even that, as long as you know your subject matter, there's nothing easier than actually making a speech or going to a networking event and building relationships. So that's what I do, and that takes time and it takes effort, and it puts yourself sometimes in uncomfortable positions, but you learn from those, and you grow and you develop. And how do you get better? Well, you practice, just like anything. Gary Player said, the more I practice, the better I get. So ultimately, that's what you've got to do.
And I know firsthand, Gary, how much time you invest in each of the boards and businesses that you advise/chair. Why? And if I can just sort of maybe clarify the question, Obviously, I know how much time it takes to chair a board. We've got mutual clients, which I've helped acquire businesses, complete fundraisers. And of course, whilst you are an advisor and are being remunerated as an advisor,
Absolutely.
there's no capital upside here. So why is it you enjoy and choose to spend time as an advisor versus a shareholder of a business?
Yeah. I suppose had my time again, I might do a different model to tell the truth. But the model I've devised is purely because I thought it was a model that suited the client and suited SME clients in particular, and actually was cost effective for them, and actually was much more in their favour than mine. And I was very fortunate to be able to do that as a business because I'd worked 37 years in banking, and I'd had a good salary, a good package, a good pension, and I was very fortunate to be in a very healthy financial position. That's just a fact. I'm not trying to, blow my own trumpet. That's just where I ended up.
That was your circumstance.
That's just my circumstances.
Sure.
So I was able to make sure that the packages I devised for my clients were not only consistent, and I think that's very important, consistency and transparency, but were very affordable without necessarily being value for money for me. And that wasn't really the key driver for me. The key driver for me was about wanting to add value to my clients. And if I can get my client to a successful exit via a strong valuation, that's fantastic for them. And not only them, but hopefully them and their family, but also hopefully their employees, because we always try and look after employees in this whole journey that we're on with our clients. So I think that is my key driver why I do this job. I love it when my clients are successful. Now you're right, I don't personally take any more success monetary wise if my clients exit at a significant value, because I don't take shares in my clients. And should I? Possibly, and I know people who do the model of sweat equity or whatever in exchange, but I've always thought, look, I don't want a conflict of interest of being a shareholder. I want to make sure I'm independent, I'm external, and ultimately I'm giving my opinion based on the fact that I want my client to be successful, not myself. So ultimately, that's the road I chose. I'm not on a retainer, I'm not on shares, I'm actually on a paid hourly rate that is very reasonable and ultimately is only chargeable when I work. So I'm not, I don't charge clients when I'm not doing any work for them.
Yes.
So everything's in favour of the client, which is fantastic because they're SMEs and they haven't got oodles of money.
Yes, well that's right. And as you say, you set a focus on success to give privately owned businesses advice that ordinarily they couldn't access.
Correct.
But I'm going to have to ask, obviously I can see why from your client perspective it works, because you're adding stacks of value and they are paying little for the privilege. Where does that selflessness come from? Because not many people choose to spend their time creating value for other people, which is respectfully what you're doing. So where does that come from?
I think I'm a big believer in paying it forward. I've had a very fortunate life to end up where I was, the son of a patent decorator, and my mother never worked in her life. So ultimately, I came from a very, very, modest background. So I was very grateful that I've ended up where I am. Yeah, that was a lot of hard work. It wasn't luck. Some of it was luck. It was not all luck. It was a lot of hard work. But I've always been very grateful for that, and I've always wanted to give something back to help other people hopefully get in the same position and better than I've been. And my wife says, and you can ask her this next time you see her, she says, look, the trouble with you, Gary, you are the saviour of lost souls. And and I've always been that. And she says, why are you giving your time for free? I said, because I'm a big believer in what goes around comes around.
Likewise.
So if I give my time freely and at the best of my advantage I can, maybe not even charge, you never charge a client for the first, probably couple of meetings, just you're really getting to know each other, you're getting to know their business, you want to make sure that you want to work with each other. You do that, and also you end up talking to a lot of people you never work with, and you still give some advice to those businesses, you do it willingly. And that's because if that piece of advice helps them along the road to success, that's great. And I'm sure at some point in time I'll get my reward for that.
And I think that's not only something, Gary, that I massively respect, but of course I do think you have already had that recognition. I mean, we should just briefly talk about the honours list, shouldn't we? I think it would be totally inappropriate.
I never talk about it, but by all means.
Just talk us through how that came about, Gary.
Yeah, I was actually at Players of Yorkshire in 2008. And, it's funny how these things happen. I was working hard as head of retail banking, and ultimately we're in a global financial crisis. So I had to close 100 branches and lose 1,000 people and make redundant, and did it with the union support and voluntary redundancies, and we actually managed to do that. But that wasn't why I got my reward. At the same time, and this is something I always encourage anybody in business to do, is look to see how you can develop yourself and your network outside of your own business. So I made it a absolute. It was a not negotiable with myself to go out and actually find roles for myself in the business community to broaden my network and to share my skills both in the private and the public sector. So that was positions like, President of the Chamber of Commerce in Leeds and York for 3 years. It was like board member of Leeds Enterprise Partnership for 3 years. It was chairman of Yorkshire Finance, Yorkshire Fund Management for 3 years. And it was chairman of governors at Leeds City College. So I did all this voluntarily, didn't get paid for it, and I did it with the bank's blessing, because the bank could see not only was I developing my own brand, but I was also developing the bank's brand. I was a senior executive in the bank, and who was given their time to these other organisations freely, and that was benefiting them, but it was also benefiting the bank as well, because they got kudos out of it.
That's right.
We got business out of it. There's no doubt about it. And I built my network massively. And ultimately, I think that was what the RDA at the time, the Regional Development Agency, recognised I was doing by helping different organisations in Yorkshire to grow and develop as a chairman or a president or a board member. And that's why we'll never know for certain, because you don't actually get to know who nominated you. But I guess I've got a feeling that's why I was nominated, for putting all those years, and it was many years, into other organisations to help them flourish, that I was eventually recognised. And it came as a complete shock. I didn't know I was getting it. A big envelope arrives at home. I opened the envelope and then he fell off the perch, because it was advice that I was, being honoured in the New Year's Honours list for services to financial services, which I guess was what I was spent my whole life doing.
And as you say, paying it forward does pay dividends, and I think that's just one example of it, isn't it, Gary?
Absolutely, sure. But paying it forward, as I said, it gives you such a pleasure in terms of being able to see other people succeed, and if you contributed in that in some small way, and I would say all my, I'll never be as important or knowledgeable about to a business as their owner. I'm not there to replace the owner. I'm not there to replace the senior management team. I'm there to support them. And if I can do that and make them more efficient, make them more productive, make them more focused on marketing, make them better understanding finance, recruiting better people, and ultimately having better governance. And that's why being a non-executive director in an SME is different to being an NED in PLC. PLC is about stakeholder protection, about stakeholder management, fiduciary responsibility. Yes, we've got that in SME land, because obviously we've got owners, we've got shareholders, but it's much more about helping the business owners and the management team run their businesses effectively, both from a strategic point of view, but also from an operational point of view. And you would never get that level of detail, that level of going into a business as an NED in a PLC, because that's not your job.
Gary, I could sit with you all day, but sadly we're going to run short on time, I suspect. So just one final question from me, Gary, if I may. Obviously you started your incredibly long career, very successful career back in the day at Barclays. If you could now sit down with Gary, who was joining Barclays, what advice would you give Gary?
Probably go to university.
Really?
Yeah, I
really?
absolutely. Because
so is that a regret?
That That is a regret now. It wasn't a regret then.
Interesting.
I think ultimately that life experience of going through university, I think the competition these days, amongst graduates is intense. I think whilst there's great vocational apprentice routes into employment, I think many employers look for, good, solid degree education behind their candidates. And I think that if you didn't have that, you're putting one hurdle in front of yourself. It doesn't mean to say you can't overcome that hurdle and actually be successful. But I think, in retrospect, I probably think that was something which I would recommend people to do. Or if they didn't do that, have a very strong route into employment through the vocational or the apprentice route, which I fully support as well. Or go into self-employment.
But just to ask if I can, obviously you say that your biggest regret is not going to university, yet me looking at you would definitely see someone who has been just hugely successful despite having not gone to university. So why is that a regret for you?
It's a regret because I didn't experience that, 3, 4, 5, how many years.
More the lifestyle.
It's more of a lifestyle. I think also, I do. There's jobs I have not not been successful in applying for because I didn't go to university in the past. And ultimately, I think I would say that on balance, it would have been. I can't say I would have done any better, that's for sure. And and I think you learn a lot through running a business, through working your way through a career with an employer. And these days it's much more common to spend a lot of time with a lot of different employers. Those days I've spent 37 years with 2. But fortunately I did all this stuff outside of employment as well to supplement my knowledge and learning. But I would say that, I would say going to university is a good thing, or going into good vocational training, or good apprenticeship, or going into self-employment. But literally, investigate every opportunity. Look at what's suitable, what's best for you, because or even then consider going back into education later on. Just because you didn't get a degree when you were 18 to 21 doesn't mean to say you can't get a degree in later life. So it's something, continuing professional development is so important. You do that, I do that, whether it's going to seminars, whether it's reading good books, whether it's taking a short program. I was on a one-day program on sales and marketing on last Wednesday. Did I need to do that? Did I get paid? No. But ultimately I did it because it's about things change in life, things change in business. You've got to keep up to date. Technology changes, best practices change, tools and management techniques change. If you're not up to date with what is going on in the business world, in your sectors that you're advising on, how can you give best advice to your client?
Gary, I genuinely would love to spend more time with you, but we are out of time. Massive thanks, and if you don't mind, I'm going to definitely get you back on a future podcast.
Love to, Calvin. Thanks for the time. Thanks,
Gary. Really appreciate your time. It's been brilliant spending some time today with Gary Lumby on the Confessions of a CEO podcast powered by RG. I've known Gary for years, given we do have many mutual clients in common, and for sure it's been fascinating to understand more about Gary's journey, the things that are important to him, and why it is actually he has gave his career to helping others realise their aspirations. Gary definitely has to be one of the most selfless entrepreneurs and business advisors I know, and no doubt therefore that is exactly why many owner-managers gravitate toward Gary as a non-exec director / board advisor. We will definitely be getting Gary back in the future on one of our future podcasts. But for now, my name is Carl Swansbury. You've been watching Confessions of a CEO / non-exec director, powered by RG, and we look forward to seeing you on future podcasts.